Toxic people don't pick you by chance. They pick you by design. They study your reactions, test your boundaries, and choose you long before you notice what's happening. Here's the disturbing truth. Toxic people move toward you because you reveal something without ever saying a word. Your emotional world is accessible. They pay attention to subtle details you overlook in yourself. How your eyes shift when someone withdraws warmth. How your breathing changes when someone becomes distant. How quickly you try to repair tension that you didn't create. How deeply you feel responsible for other people's moods. These tiny signals tell them more than any conversation ever could. Because toxic individuals don't look for weak people. They look for responsive people. People whose emotions move. People who adjust quickly. People who soften their tone to maintain peace. People who react with empathy, even when empathy isn't deserved. To a toxic person, these traits are not kindness. They are openings. This is how the selection begins. Quiet observation. They don't need to confront you. They simply watch how you respond to discomfort. Do you feel silence too fast? Do you apologize when someone else should? Do you double explain yourself to avoid misunderstanding? Do you try to fix emotional distance the moment you feel it? The moment you become emotionally predictable, the dynamic shifts. A toxic person no longer needs to observe you quietly. They begin shaping the environment around you. This isn't done with yelling, arguments, or open conflict. That would expose the manipulation too quickly. Instead, they create emotional climates that influence your behavior without ever giving you a reason to question theirs. One day they offer warmth. The next day, distance. Then they give just enough attention to keep you engaged, and just enough withdrawal to keep you unsettled. None of this is random. These are controlled variables in a psychological experiment where you are the subject and they are the researcher. Each emotional shift serves a purpose: to measure how fast you adapt, how deeply you internalize their moods, and how willing you are to change yourself just to stabilize them. This is the foundation of psychological conditioning. It's not dramatic, it's systematic. Toxic people know that human beings crave emotional consistency. So when they deliberately remove that consistency, your mind begins searching for patterns, and that search makes you vulnerable. You start asking yourself questions you never asked before. What did I do wrong? Why did their tone change? Did I say something off? Why does this tension feel like my responsibility? How do I fix this before it gets worse? These questions don't appear because you're weak. They appear because you're human. But toxic people use that humanity as leverage. They don't pressure you directly. They simply create uncertainty, and your mind does the rest. Uncertainty forces your brain to seek resolution, and the person who provides that resolution becomes the person who holds power. This is where self-doubt begins. Not the loud kind that destroys you, but the quiet erosion that rewrites your boundaries, one small adjustment at a time. You edit your words before speaking. You soften your tone without thinking. You avoid topics that might upset them. You behave cautiously, not because you're afraid of them, but because you're afraid of the emotional imbalance they intentionally create. Slowly, your identity begins to shift. Not dramatically, but subtly. You start doing things you wouldn't have done a year ago. You prioritize their reactions over your needs. You mold yourself into the version of you that keeps them stable. But here's the truth most people never see. No version of you will ever be stable enough for someone who gains power through instability. A toxic person doesn't want resolution. Resolution removes their leverage. What they want is internal reorganization, a psychological shift where your emotions revolve around theirs. When this shift occurs, control becomes effortless. It no longer requires manipulation from the outside. You begin manipulating yourself to avoid discomfort they intentionally create. Your thoughts shrink. Your emotional world narrows. Your decisions become filtered through their reactions. And by the time you notice the change, you're already living in someone else's emotional architecture. Every one of these reactions answers the same question. Can your emotional state be influenced from the outside? If the answer is yes, the selection is complete. But they don't reveal it right away. Instead, they test you in ways so small they seem accidental. A slightly delayed reply, a colder tone, a sudden shift in interest, a small withdrawal of warmth. Nothing extreme, nothing obvious, just enough to make you wonder what changed. And if you respond by trying harder, trying to clarify, trying to restore the connection, they learn something crucial. You are willing to regulate your emotions based on their behavior. This is where the process turns darker. They begin controlling the emotional climate around you without ever raising their voice. Warmth one day, distance the next. Attention followed by silence. Connection followed by subtle absence. These shifts are not mistakes. They are psychological calibrations. Toxic people want to see how quickly you adapt to each emotional temperature they create. If you chase their warmth, they withdraw it. If you fear their silence, they use it. If you over-explain when they seem irritated, they repeat that irritation. Your reactions become their roadmap. Your empathy becomes their leverage. Your predictability becomes their power. Most people never recognize this stage because it doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like uncertainty. It feels like confusion. It feels like maybe you did something wrong. And while you are busy trying to decode their behavior, they are decoding yours with perfect clarity. To them, you are not unpredictable. You are readable. And once someone is readable, they are influenceable. But here's the part almost no one realizes until it's too late. Toxic people don't choose you because you're weak. They choose you because you're strong in the wrong places. They choose you because you care, because you feel deeply, because you try to understand others even when they never try to understand you, because you give people the benefit of the doubt long after they've shown you who they are. These qualities are not flaws. They are powerful traits, but in the hands of someone who understands dark psychology, they become tools. Tools that can be used to bend your behavior, your emotions, and eventually, your identity. A toxic person recognizes your empathy long before you recognize their intentions. They see your sensitivity as an opening. Your kindness is a weakness. Your patience as permission. Your understanding is an advantage. And once they realize your reactions can be shaped, they don't need to confront you anymore. They simply begin rearranging the emotional walls around you. A sigh instead of a statement. A pause instead of an answer. A subtle disappointment instead of a clear request. A sudden quietness instead of a disagreement. These small psychological exchanges don't feel like manipulation, but together, they build an emotional framework that shapes every decision you make. This is the hidden architecture of control. Not threats, not ultimatums, not domination, just carefully calibrated emotional imbalance. Humans naturally adjust themselves to avoid discomfort. Toxic people exploit this instinct with precision. They raise an eyebrow, and you rethink your words. They go silent, and you apologize for something you didn't do. They withdraw attention, and you work twice as hard to earn it back. You start anticipating reactions that haven't happened, You rehearse conversations before they occur. You shrink your truth so theirs can feel larger. You protect their emotional world at the cost of your own. This is the psychological inversion, when your mind begins orbiting someone else's emotional gravity. But something remarkable happens when awareness finally enters the picture. It doesn't happen through a dramatic confrontation. It doesn't happen through a sudden betrayal. It usually happens in a moment of exhaustion, when your mind whispers a quiet truth. This doesn't feel like me anymore. And that moment, that single, fragile realization, is the beginning of the collapse. Once you understand the manipulation behind the manipulation, the power structure breaks. Not instantly, not loudly, but inevitably. You stop explaining yourself to silence. You stop apologizing to tension. You stop adjusting your emotions to match theirs. You stop carrying weight that was never yours. And control, true psychological control, cannot survive inside a mind that has become self-aware. This is where it ends. Not with anger, not with revenge, not with a dramatic exit. It ends with clarity. Clarity makes you unreadable. Unreadable makes you unpredictable. Unpredictability makes you untouchable. And in dark psychology, that is the moment control doesn't just weaken, it dies.